Just a minute here, we'll get a. Okay, thank you. I'd like to thank the PIPEX committee for inviting me to give this talk. What started as about 18 or 19 years ago, John Hotchner put an article in Linz talking about all the various type of markings that you could find on US mail. That sort of got me hooked. I joined the Auxiliary Markings Club and I started collecting all these markings. Well, then someday I said, well, what do you do with all these markings? How do you classify them? And so then I came up with this idea about how do they affect mail delivery? And I looked at it two ways. You could have a delay in the mail, and a delay is anything that stops the mail from going directly to the recipient, okay? Of course, then the other obvious end is it's a permanent delay. The mail never got delivered to the person, it was returned to the sender, or either went to the dead letter office. So many covers are going to be seen in this exhibit or show here. And there's a few of them I will go into detail on. I want to acknowledge, though, that this was originally part of a PIPEX presentation or exhibit. And both Tony and John Hotchner provided a lot of help to me over the years in getting this thing going. On the delayed deliveries, there's simple things that could be forwarded. Something went wrong, you had to advertise it. There's something wrong with the address. Postage wasn't there. Things were late. There's some airmail interruptions. It could be censored. You know, so we're going to go through some of these things and give you examples. For undelivered mail, it obviously got returned. It wasn't claimed or unknown. People did directory service. They couldn't find it. There's a lot of stuff with military mail that never got doing. During the different world wars, mail service was suspended. So there might be something fake about the item. And then we'll finish up with going over to the dead letter office. One of the types of delay was when a person moved to a different address. The forwarding of US mail has been discussed in extreme detail. Tony published a book, Forwarding of the US Mail from the US Post Office Department from 1792 to 2001. And if you ever really want to go into the subject, that book is an excellent reference. On the left, there's a cover here from the 1850s, so early 1850s. Prior to April 1st, 1855, a fee of 5 cents was due for forwarding the first class mail. So it's marked forwarded, the address is closed out, 5 cents due. After April 1st, then the fee for forwarding for first class was reduced to 3 cents. And then as of June 8th, 1877, forwarding was free. Third class mail, it was charged 1 cent for forwarding. In other words, the rate was 1 cent and it was also charged that rate again if it was forwarded. The interesting cover on the right has a lot, you can see a lot of markings all over it. It's a Civil War era cover and there's no fee for forwarding because it was forwarded totally within the military service. In other words, it go to different military bases or branches and there's no fee for that because it was self-contained within the military. 1934 cover shown on the left from Warner Brothers Studio. It was a cover sent to Miss Helen Chandler. She wasn't there and it was forwarded. From Tom Richards, I found out that this is one of the rarest markings found for all of the movie studio mail. The interesting one on the right, it was forwarded, but notice it says change of address, okay? So the military had a change of address, and that was the reason that it was forwarded. This one's interesting. Just stamped all over the place. It was forwarded 6 times. You'd be interested if someone has a cover that was forwarded more than that. But you know, it just went all over the place, but yet it was still delivered. And that's persistence within the post office department. It's really good. So, a second here. The postal laws and regulations required that the postmaster advertise the name of an addressee in the local paper for items that were not called for at the post office destination. A fee of 1 cent was established so that the postmaster could be reimbursed. And you can see this one on the left that says advertised 1 cent. If a letter was called for within the required time, they set so many days it had to be available for that. If it wasn't picked up, then it would go to the dead letter office. One on the right's kind of interesting. The cover was returned to the post office with the note by the carrier up there in the left-hand corner. But the charge for advertising was noted, you can see, by the 1-cent postage due stamp. The 1887 Postal Laws and Regulation directed the postmaster to correct and forward the mail that had obvious mistakes. Also, it was required that they had to have a directory to ascertain what is the correct address. In other words, the postmaster had to have a directory that's current. And so clerks in the delivery section of the post office would apply a marking, notice that the address was incorrect. And so you can see here there's a deficiency in the address. They got it, it was corrected, and it was sent on. And then there's a postcard from 1907 that has a kind of a detailed marking about that. But it also reminds the people that it should be addressed to the correct address. But in both cases, this is the deficiency noted by the post office because their records had the correct address. There's a thing here that's, so it was held for postage. There's this held for postage. Unpaid letters, as of April 1st, 1855, the sender was notified by the post office, and then mail was sent once they received the postage. But the interesting thing is this little label here. It's called a Good Samaritan label. The May 1882 Postal Guide barred our organization from applying this type of thing. And so, and again, in 1883, the Postal Guide urged adherence to the 1879 laws. There's a whole number of these, well, a fair number of these Good Samaritan labels. Recently, if you were a member of the United States Philatelic Classic Society, there's an article that just came out in their May issue. And in that, the author lists 91 covers during the period from 1850s to the late 1870s that had Good Samaritan labels. This one right here, the box 582, he lists 14 different covers. So this is one of 14 known for that type of label. Again, insufficient postage. The one on the left has a 3-cent star die envelope. It was demonetized as of August 1861. And over here on the left, the reading, it says, soldier's letter, no new stamps. In July 22nd, 1861, Congress passed a law that permitted ordinary soldiers to send mail prepaid or postage due with the recipient paying for it. So again, because this was demonetized, it was postage due, 3 cents. And it was endorsed soldier's letter. But the endorsement had to be done that along with the signature of an officer. Chaplains and surgeons in the hospital could also sign for the envelope. And this one, the case over here, it's reading here, it says HHS Assistant Surgeon. So I tried to find out a little bit more about this. Well, it turns out this is a man by the name of Henry Sayes out of Ohio. And the letter here was addressed to his wife. And the envelope's dated February 19th, 1862. The Union Army had entered the area, and as of the 14th, the Confederate troops had been evacuated. So this is for that area. This is the earliest reported federal use after a Union occupation. Further on, I got really looking into this whole thing, and I found out that the William Clements Library at the University of Michigan had the letters for this guy. And I was able to retrieve the letter for this envelope. And I went into the whole story, and I've submitted an article that went to La Posta that'll get published about this particular cover and all the details. On the right-hand side, someone wanted to use a documentary stamp. Well, that's not allowed, and so it's postage due, marked with a postage due stamp, 2 cents. Missent is a marking that says the post office made an error, okay? And a common one, it says missent on the left. This is from the 1850s with 3-cent stamp. And many times it'll say missent or missent to a specific city, but then the post office would forward it on. My favorite missent marking is the one shown here on the right, where it says missent and there's a miss and a cent put on there. And I don't think there's too many of these things. The neat thing about this particular cover, it was given to me free by a friend. There's been a few of them around, but it's just kind of neat. Late arrivals. This cover on the left has a too late marking, okay? And it turns out that the too late hand stamp was really not discussed in the PL&Rs. And the marking was just used to note that the mail had arrived too late for some desired service. This one on the left is the third known example of the marking applied at New York on covers sent to Boston in the 1850s, okay? This particular cover was sent in 1852. The cover on the right talks about night airmail, okay? Today, we don't believe that there's anything special about airmail service, right? Whether or not the flights went day or night. That's not the case in 1925. The business interests of New York and Chicago had lobbied for nighttime airmail service. The Post Office Department initiated the service on July 1st, 1925. Mail was carried on a Curtiss plane called the Carrier Pigeon. It could handle about a half a ton of mail, which is about 40,000 letters. With the standard airmail rate at this time was 8 cents per ounce, the PO established a rate of 10 cents per ounce for this New York to Chicago nighttime service. Pieces prepaid at least 8 cents for this service were marked postage due, okay, you can see down here at the bottom, and were mailed, and the fee was collected from the recipient. This cover went from October 16th, 1925 at 4 p.m. It was received in Chicago on October 17th. The cover had the markings night airmail and due cents. It was supposed to go to Wisconsin, but could not be carried by plane, and the post office added the marking received at Chicago, too late for air dispatch. It was forwarded by train, then arrived in Wisconsin on the 18th. This special airmail service was terminated in January 1927, so this rate existed for only 18 months. Airmail interruptions. One of the things I got kind of involved in, and actually wrote an article in the Auxiliary Marketings Club in October of 2015 about airmail crashes. Of course, in the 1920s and 30s, airmail crashes were actually fairly common, but in many cases, they would collect the mail. So on the left, contract airmail route 18 crashed in a snowstorm in Utah in '29. Mail was found in a burned state. They recovered 1,026 pounds of mail, and it was forwarded from Salt Lake City. There are two types of caches known for this particular crash. American Airlines flight AM-23 crashed in Arkansas, shown on the right, on January 14, 1936. The cause of the wreck was never determined. They recovered about 150 pounds of mail that was forwarded from Little Rock. There are three types of caches known for this one. All of these covers, these markings have been documented in the American Airmail Catalog. Censored mail. One on the left. Censorship in World War II is based on the Espionage Act of June 1917 and the Sedition Act of 1918. The Allied Expeditionary Force rules were adopted on July 13th, 17. And so this particular cover is marked with free franking for the military, but it had the Army censors noted there in the lower left. The one on the right is one of my favorite ones, only because of what we do with Hanford and where I work for many years. But in '41, the government had the War Powers Act that led to the Office of Censorship. People working at Los Alamos working on the Manhattan Project, okay? However, in order for all the secrecy, what they did is they created special post office boxes at Santa Fe, New Mexico. So for anybody, the mail went to the Santa Fe, it was then censored and sent on. This particular P.O. Box number 180, shown here, was for military staff, okay? And you can see what's hard. P.O. Box 1663 was the most common for this, and P.O. Box 528 was for medical staff, non-technical staff, and Corps of Engineers. There are other P.O. boxes set up but not found. Covered in this area, one of the most interesting ones I've heard of is Ralph Nafziger has a first day cover sent to this P.O. box. That'd be kind of neat. Okay, train robbery now. There was a train robbery, and you can see here, this cover is all really beat up, and we'll go into this. So there was a wreck of a train at Siskiyou, Oregon on October 11th, 1923. The marking on the cover, right there, it's kind of fine, but it says damage and wreck of the Ashland Gerber train number 13 at Siskiyou, Oregon, October 11th, 23. There are three brothers, the Diotrament brothers. They wanted to rob the train. So what they did is they boarded the train shortly before it entered a tunnel. They forced the engineer to stop the train inside the tunnel, 3,000-foot long tunnel. Dynamite was used to open the mail car, and the blast killed the clerk. The robbers killed the engineer, fireman, and brakeman. The brothers fled empty-handed. They didn't get anything. And a very large manhunt was conducted to find the robbers. That took about 5 years. Well, I wrote to the Smithsonian, okay, and I was able to cover the posters. What's nice about this one, which always goes good with an exhibit, it actually shows the mail car that was blown up, okay? And so I used that in my exhibit. You just have to give credit to the Smithsonian. Next part that was interesting from the Smithsonian is, here's the wanted poster for these guys. Notice it says $15,900 reward in gold. Well, at that time, that's 757 ounces of gold. Today, that would be $1.3 million. Yeah, they went all over the world hunting for these guys. Damaged mail. The one on the left is really all beat up, and it says, marking, train ran over pouch, contents okay, can be read. What it meant by train running over a pouch is that many depots would have a hook, and the mail bag would be on there, and the train would come by and try to grab that mail as they go. Well, obviously, one got run over, but at least it did get there. There's a number of these covers shown by fire, damaged by fire in transit in 1944. I know that Tom Richards is trying to put an exhibit together with these type of markings. Okay, miscellaneous situations to talk about. The one on the left is a cover, special delivery cover, and it was sent to the Smithsonian, okay? In 1910, this label, without going into it, says they could not deliver it as special delivery, so it went by normal mail. There may be other ones out there, but this is the only one I've ever seen for special delivery that has such a detailed explanation. Cover on the right, 1929, you can see that it went to this Mr. Ackerman. He was a congressman, and it turns out he was one of the most outstanding stamp collectors of his day and who traveled widely. Now, the quarantine marking, it's not a quarantine because of something like COVID or something like that, okay? What happens was they would hold the mail, commonly for one just waiting for the post office to clear it for docking or anchoring. In other words, there's fees, passports, cargo, medical statements by the captain and things like that. And so that's, again, why that marking was there. And again, this is a rather uncommon marking. Okay. Now we're getting into undelivered mail, something returned. The cover at the left here was returned from Chicago on October 31st, 1869. This is the earliest known pointing finger return to marking from Chicago, and is one of two known of a free return non-drop letter. The other one is shown in Leonard Piskovich's book, Chicago Postal History. This over here is in Virginia City, Montana, okay? Gold was discovered there in 1863, and it became the territorial capital in 1865. Both this cover and the other one shown in Len's book were addressed to jewelers, so it's probably obvious someone's trying to sell gold to jewelers. Interesting to note that even though that was the territorial capital in 1865, today the city is there, but there's less than 200 residents. The one on the right, it says, by was returned, the carrier said the person couldn't find. Carrier label seldom used for undeliverable mail. It first appeared in 1884 and was used up to 1900. Most of these type of carrier labels were normally seen in the East Coast from New York and Boston. Nice large pointing finger return marking. Mail that was unclaimed or unknown, if they knew the return address, they'd obviously do it. In other words, it went to somebody here at the post office. It wasn't claimed, and the marking says no such office and state named, unclaimed, and they returned it. What I like about this is the little scroll marking for the pointing finger return. It's kind of a cute one. The one on the right says unknown, and it says return, but if there wasn't an address, it would go to the dead letter office. Directory service. The one on the left is a penalty envelope from the Department of Justice, Indian Territory, Oklahoma. Cato, that's Indian Territory. And it says person not found, name not in directory. So it got returned back. 1942 cover on the right was sent to a serviceman on the ship USS Rigel at San Francisco. It says directory service given by searcher. And it was forwarded to 2 other locations without success, and so it got returned to the sender. The cover on the right was sent from Savannah, North Carolina in August 1944 to a Sergeant Miller. The sender noted that he was in the hospital. There's a parenthetical HSP here. Sergeant Miller could not be found there, and 4 directory searches were noted throughout on the cover. The item was returned to the sender, noted by the purple pointing finger hand right there, and indicating the need for a better address. Since the box hospitalized marking was also in purple, I assumed it was applied at the same time as return to marking. And of course, this whole thing about trying to find people during World War II sometimes is quite a job. One of the things that's interesting is there's a book that's been published on all the post offices. So if you go to the different APO, then you can find out that APO was a convalescent hospital in England. Cover on the right shows one sent from New York in 1943, when at that time to the person was in APO 9, that was in Algeria, okay? And at the left, there's a manuscript marking denoted missing in action. And the missing in action had been crossed out. See, crossed out, missing out, crossed out. Trying to find out why. Well, you go to the back side of the cover, and you can see that he's a prisoner of war, okay? And so the AGO form notes that he's a prisoner of war, dated September 16th, 1943, and then it was returned to the sender. Okay. This shows 2 of the V-mail envelopes. Kind of an interesting story that I found associated with these 2 covers. And in fact, these 2 covers, as I recall, I got at a PIPEX show many years ago. And both covers were within the same dealer's box, new material. This is the V-mail letter sheet, and the V dot, 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 that's Morse code for the letter V, okay, on the V-mail. And it's franked with a 6-cent stamp. And then over here on the right, there's a penalty cover, and this particular thing had 2 microfilm messages which were in there. So reading the contents, I found was kind of interesting. There's a man named Michael Seaman, and he was sending his address to his brother, Andrew Seaman. This one here was written in February 25, 1943. Michael was Michael was stationed in New Mexico with the 302nd Bomber Group. they trained people for flying bombers and combat missions. And his brother Andrew was in the 301st Bomber Group stationed in Algeria, okay? And so that's APO, right there, say 520, that was in Algeria. And I found out that this guy Andrew was a ball turret gunner. That's the guy on the little thing under the belly of the airplane, which is a pretty dangerous position. He received an air medal, the Oak Leaf Cluster, in March of 43. So then his brother didn't hear from him. So then the one on the right, he sent him another one in 43. And this, he heard about his brother was missing in action, and also knew that he had got the medal. Well, they returned, both of these were returned to him because it turns out that the Andrew could not be located. And so obviously the guy had been killed in action, and someone went through his locker, and then they returned these letters back to his brother. In World War II, B-17s had a very high casualty rate. And there might have been other letters in this correspondence, but it's kind of a sad story that here's this guy writing to his brother, can't get a hold of him or much, and ends up finding the guy was killed. It's kind of neat to find things like that in the dealer's boxes. Unreturned military mail. Well, this one here, 1917 cover to Russia. Well, how the heck do you know it went to Russia? Well, as it turns out, the label can be lifted. It wasn't attached totally. And of course, then, you know, because of the war, it was returned. The term service suspended up here actually covers two basic reasons for prohibition of mail addressed outside the country. The primary use was to cut off communications with belligerent countries and occupied territories. So that suspended service or no service was used to do that. The other time is when you can't get through to a country because of the war, okay? And so here's it censored, the thing was returned because of the war during Russia. 1941 cover on the right, same thing, returned to service, service suspended. You know, you just couldn't get to them through the Philippines. There's a whole wide variety of these type of return to service suspended. You could have a whole exhibit just on that alone. Mail that was addressed to a label to be involved in illegal operations was marked fraudulent. You see that, fraudulent, and we returned to the sender. So somehow or other, the government knew that this products company in Denver, Colorado, something was not going right with them. Another marking similar to it's called fictitious, and that was used to note that mail addressed to fictitious persons or firms. Those type of markings were, I mean, the government didn't have a marking for it. So you can see here that it was typed on. So typing, mail ordered, returned to sender by orders of the Postmaster General. So they had to type that label on. So again, something was wrong about that the government knew about, so they returned the mail. Here's one of my favorite covers, and dealing with an area here in Portland. The cover shown has two markings. There's an unclaimed forward address destroyed by flood, okay? And then there's a postage due, return to sender from Portland, Oregon. The cover was originally sent to Oklahoma and then forwarded to Portland, Oregon. The item was returned to the sender because the address in Portland no longer existed. It was for third-class mail. You can see 1 cent rate. And what happened was the cover has, you can see a Merry Christmas marking, so you know about the time frame. It was mailed in late December of 48. The 2 cent postage due return for third-class mail went into effect on January 1st, 1949, but existed only until January 24th, 1949. This is something that Tony helped me find out. Thus, the return of the item from Tennessee to Portland only occurred during this time period. So what about the flood? What in the world was this flood over here? Well, a World War II housing project was created just north of Portland on the floodplain of the Columbia River. As the area was about halfway between Portland and Vancouver, it was called Vanport. It was created to house workers for the Henry Kaiser shipyard. At its peak, it was the second largest city in Oregon. On May 30th, 1948, a large section of the dike holding back the Columbia River broke, and as a result, Vanport was flooded. 15 people died, 18,500 residents were displaced. So this cover could not be delivered because the address no longer existed. So, as I mentioned earlier, that if you had mail, they want to return to the sender, but if there's no address, it goes to a place called the dead letter office. And this office had the responsibility to open and inspect a mail that was undeliverable. If the sender could be determined, it was returned. If not, it was advertised, there was no response, it was either sold as waste or destroyed. This 1894 letter on the left, it was unclaimed, it returned to the post office. The Division of Dead Letters with box marking noted that it classifies the letter. They opened the mail and returned it free of charge to the sender. The one on the right was in 1889. It was advertised, sent to the DLO. 50 cents was found inside the letter, and it's classified by this marking as a money letter, okay? And then it tells where it's stored in the place. And it was a free return. The subject of the dead letter office has been written up in detail by Tony. There's a book he calls Insights into Postal History. Chapter 4 is the dead letter office. Again, in his further insights of U.S. postal history, chapter 1 is the dead letter office. And also he's published a number of articles in our Auxiliary Markings Club newsletter that covers a lot of this on the dead letter office. One of the things that's interesting on dead letters also is there's these markings. There's a triangle and there's a star. The one on the left, a fee of 3 cents, was due in May 20th, 1920. The triangle was used to indicate the item was of no apparent value. The one on the right, the 6-pointed star, was for the minor division that says there's something valuable, like a will, a deed, stamps, business papers, or something. There are a few other types of markings available to that too. So I'm actually zipping right along. So what I wanted to do is make a plug for the Auxiliary Markings Club. Almost all of these subjects that I've talked about today have been written up in the Auxiliary Markings Club newsletter by various people. You can check it out at www.postalmarkings.org. It's a great thing. There's a colored newsletter that Tony publishes 4 times a year, and there's just all sorts of stuff. Like in this particular one here, down here, and this, I talked about labels that can be used as auxiliary markings. But here's an unclaimed. So all of these subjects, any one of these things that I talked about today could be a subject for an exhibit. And I hope that maybe some of you, if you're not a member, look up the website and consider joining this club. So at that point, I'm going to stop sharing, turn it back over to Tony, and people can then provide comments, questions, or whatever.
Jerry, thanks. That was really a great presentation. I mean, you show an awful lot of subtle knowledge that you've done a lot of research, and so I really appreciated it. As much as I know, I learned a lot from what you said. Now, at this time, if everyone would unmute themselves, and if you have any questions or comments, please ask then. I don't, okay, I'll recognize myself. There were very few things I really had questions about or even comments about, but the 2 email letters that were returned are interesting to me, because I believe the only reason they exist still as envelopes is because they were returned from a person who was dead. Otherwise, they would have gone by email, and they would have been, the original letters would have been lost. So I think they were kept because they had to be returned, because the person passed away.
Yeah, I think the recipient had those things, and somehow or other they were in his locker when he was the bomber group was stationed in England. And then when they found the guy was dead, somebody went through the locker and then returned stuff that they found. Joe?
Joe, go ahead.
Yeah, Jerry, I had one question and one clarification. The Santa Fe, New Mexico, Los Alamos post office boxes, you said box 1663 was the most common, but what was it used for? Was it used for civilians?
It
Or
was used for just about anything. I'll have to go back and find out. Somewhere I know that I forget who it was. Somebody wrote a series of articles about this in Linz.
okay,
To find out. It's just that the whole point, at least from my standpoint, was just to show, okay, the mail was delayed. It had to go because of the war, to a secret box, and after that, it was censored.
Right.
But I can find that article about it, and I can send it to you.
okay. I had noted that a Hanford cover from 1943, it was a Camp Hanford cover, sold on eBay for about $185 a couple months ago. And I found that interesting that they got that much for it. The clarification I needed was for the website for the auxiliary markings group. Is that a dash?
Yeah, it's a dash. It's postal-markings.org.
Okay, great.
And the one thing is, there's a lot of stuff that's archived on that. There's exhibits that have been done. There's other books that people have published, and
Right.
Doug Klein has done quite a job, and it's a very extensive website.
Great. Thank you.
Can I comment? I don't know much about it, but Wayne Youngblood, his father actually lived in Los Alamos during the war, and he's got an exhibit of these markings. So, he's one of the authors on the APS journal. He offers an article every month, and you might contact him and ask if you have any questions. Any other questions or comments? Please raise your hand. Okay, I don't see anyone who has any questions. I would again comment that Jerry has really presented a spectacular presentation in terms of knowledge. And we will be putting every one of these seminars up online and as YouTube sources in a week. So if you want to look at it again or go back on anything that he covered, you'll be able to do that at the time. So I want to thank you all for coming and participating, and especially thanks to Jerry. There are many other seminars that if you look on our website, PIPEX website, you'll see links to, as you did because you registered, but you may want to, I know there's a number of them that I haven't signed up for that I'm going to join myself. So thanks again, and again, take care.
Bye-bye, everyone.